All right, I'm going to get us started here. Welcome everybody. I'm Jarrett Hill, the Vice President of NABJLA. We are going to go ahead and jump into our conversation about Black men reporting on Black men. Rather than trying to say who every person is and what they do and where they come from, I'd like to have all of our guests that are joining us jump in and just kind of tell us who you are, where you work, and where you're from, what you do. So Trymaine, I'll let you start out first. I'm gonna unmute you so you can hop in here. Go for it.
My name is Trymaine Lee. I'm a correspondent with MSNBC based out of New York. I cover a mix of policy and politics and the way those two things have power over everyday people. So most of my work, whether it's broadcast or in the Into America podcast, which I am the host, I basically engage with how people engage with politics and the power structure. And so I've been at MSNBC for about going on 8 years now, and a journalist for about 17 years.
All right. Ernie, tell people who you are, what you do, where you're from.
Good afternoon. My name is Ernie Suggs. I've been a reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution now for about 22 years. It's been a long time. So I cover race and culture primarily. I've covered pretty much since I've been at the paper, I've covered pretty much everything, but it's always had a bent towards race. That's kind of revved up a little bit over the last couple of years, probably since Obama's been in office. It's been pretty much 99% race. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm covering, like, for example, with the COVID-19 situation, I'm covering how race has played a part in how African Americans and Latinos and Asians are being impacted by the disease. So, and I've been doing that for about 20 years. So, and I'm based here in Atlanta.
All right. And Eugene, tell people where you are, where you're from, and what you do.
Good to be here. My name's Eugene Scott. I'm a political reporter for the Washington Post. I cover identity politics for a vertical we have called The Fix, which is an analysis, policy analysis focus. And so I've been there about 3 years. It'll be 3 years, should I say, at the end of the summer. Before that, I covered the Trump campaign and administration for CNN Politics. And so most of my work for the past 5 years has been about how different identities process politics and how policy affects them differently.
Nice. And then Jamil Smith is joining us as well. Jamil, tell people who you are, what you do, and where you are.
Yes, I'm Jamil Smith, a senior writer with Rolling Stone magazine. I cover politics from the standpoint of identity, meaning race, gender, sexual identity. Therefore, I also do a little podcasting and radio hosting on the side when the occasions allow. But predominantly, I just write about 2 columns a week and also do features and interviews for Rolling Stone magazine, print and online.
Got you. Okay. First thing I really wanted to kind of jump in with everybody. We're obviously having this conversation right now as we're all kind of in the wake of the Ahmaud Arbery story. And I wrote this piece for Revolt talking about how I can feel these moments impacting me on a daily basis. And I wanted to have this conversation to kind of talk to other Black male journalists about the ways that they're engaging these stories in these times, whether it's Ahmaud Arbery, but also COVID-19, the coronavirus, and kind of wanting to get some perspective from other Black men about what it's like to do these stories, to be a part of these stories, to live in them, but also to cover them. So any one of you can jump in first, and well, it's a little harder on Zoom to do that. So I'll say, Eugene, you can take the first one, but talk to me about how you feel impacted by these stories or covering these stories right now.
Yeah, the first example that comes to mind when you asked the question was very early during the pandemic, when we began to get data about who was being affected disproportionately. I wrote a story about some of the reasons why Black people were dying at greater rates and being infected by greater rates, at greater rates by coronavirus. And, it was just pretty straightforward, based on all kinds of things like access to healthcare and housing and where Black people are more likely to live and how these buildings are built and built poorly, frontline employees, all of the stories that we've read quite a bit by now, but it was still really early then. And I wrote it and, got quite a few calls from podcasts and radio stations to discuss the story. And I think maybe the day after I published it, I probably had 3 or 4 interviews that morning. And I was just, stating facts, just talking, just not really thinking a whole lot about it. And after my last interview, a cloud of depression came over me so heavily that I was not able to work for the rest of the day. I struggled to even form a single sentence as I started thinking about what I had been reporting on. And, in writing policy analysis, I move in this space that is in between, traditional reporting and opinion writing. And so I definitely don't write about me and my thoughts and my opinions. But the reality is when you're writing about how something affects Black communities, it's not easy to disassociate yourself with that experience. And I don't think I was really as prepared for how devastating personally I had found this pandemic to be until after I had written about it and spoken about it and processed it myself.
You on mute, brother. I can't hear you.
Sorry, Jamil, tell me about how it's been for you covering these stories and this time.
Well, I think one of the things that we all have to take into account, I think that all of us at some level can relate to, is the need to illuminate angles of reporting and analysis and opinion that perhaps either our predominantly white newsrooms won't take into account in their coverage, or our predominantly white audiences won't necessarily look for. And so what we need to do is say, hey, this is all encompassing and all engrossing and too much, to handle as a story. What are the angles that we know probably are going to get missed, especially when it comes to Black folks? And so what we have to do, I think, is look for angles. Say, one of the stories that I'm working on right now deals with the drug that Trump has been essentially selling or hyping, hydroxychloroquine. And it's not just as, the effect that it's had on, people who take it, but also the fact that it's taking away from communities of color that actually need it, because it's saying, okay, it's affecting people who have lupus, who have rheumatoid arthritis, who actually need the drug. And those diseases predominantly affect our communities. So it's not just pointing out saying, hey, disproportionately, yes, we're dying from this, but also we are being affected in so many other ways. We got to peel back the layers consistently and thoroughly on a regular basis, because frankly, unfortunately, I think that too many are not looking to do that on a regular basis. Jarrett.
You're on mute.
Sorry, we're working on some tech stuff here. I'm trying to mute myself so you don't hear me typing. Ernie, you're there in Georgia, where obviously the Ahmaud Arbery story has happened, but also COVID-19 has been a unique story there in Georgia as well. Talk to me about how it feels to cover these stories there as a journalist, but also as a Black man.
Well, Eugene kind of alluded to the fact about, how you can personally feel overwhelmed and kind of get to this kind of level of depression. And I've been feeling that way for a long time. Trymaine and I, back 5 or 6 years ago, I would see Trymaine every month somewhere else, whether it's in Ferguson or Baltimore or Charlotte, someplace where all these innocent Black men unarmed Black men rather, were being shot and killed. So just kind of like on top of doing that every month, it seemed like going to these things, covering these rallies, being in the middle of riots and things like that. So you kind of, at some point you got to take a step back and kind of look at your own mental health and your own mental safety. But, on another level, a lot of people, and you guys probably hear this all the time, is about, about covering Black issues. Do you ever get tired of doing it? Or should you be covering Black issues because you're Black? Do you feel like you're being pigeonholed? But I love doing it because, like Jamil said, we know the angles. We know, we can go in and write a story in 20 minutes that's going to take someone else an hour or 2 hours or day to do, because we know we've been there, we've been in the trenches, we have the historical and institutional knowledge to kind of write that story. So it's important that we're in there, but you know, and I'm glad that I'm able to cover, you know, the Black angle to COVID. I'm glad I haven't covered any Ahmaud Arbery because I'm 100% covering the COVID case. But you know, I am ready to be able to jump in there and kind of cover these important issues that we may be missing, because I think it's important that we have a voice in that, because we can also tell those stories, you know, better than a lot of other people can.
Sure. Trymaine, same question. What's it like right now covering these stories for you?
You know, as Ernie mentioned, you know, we've been doing this for a very long time. And, you know, Malcolm X talks about doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And it's kind of this insanity. And so sometimes, not just as Black journalists, I think as Black people in this country, we're in this state of insanity because none of it ever really makes sense. And so whether it's the Trayvon Martin and Eric Garner and Mike Brown and now Ahmaud Arbery and COVID-19, and you see the structural connection there, right? That none of this is by accident, none of this is by chance, none of this is brand new. And so in this moment, to be one, telling this story of inequity and the pain heaped upon our shoulders and our people having to, you know, be strong all the time, including us as journalists, Black journalists on the front line. And so this idea, one, of course we get weary and of course we get tired, but we do walk in mighty big shoes, right? As Black journalists, as members of NABJ, who were foundational, right, in this complex of us getting out here and telling these stories. And so, you know, it's especially with the Ahmaud Arbery case, and we can say this about any number of them and the names that we don't know, to see the senselessness of it and to see the response and see the mechanisms of power have to churn just right, just right for these cases to emerge, let alone justice. We're not even talking about justice yet, right? We're talking about procedural. If we didn't see that videotape, no one would be held to account. And again, justice will play out, right? Well, it goes to the court system. We'll see what happens. But it's rough. And then I don't think there's much difference between, you know, Ahmaud Arbery being killed the way he has, the way so many of us have been killed, and looking at all the disparities as it relates to COVID-19. They're all structural. They're all historic. We need to put it in the proper context. We're not just dying because we eat too many cheeseburgers, right? It's the densely populated areas we live in. It's the air that we're breathing. It's the water that we're drinking. It's all of the above, right? And so it's tough, but it's also, you know, kind of cathartic in a way, because we get to release, we get to tell our stories, we get to center ourselves and center our people. And I don't think, you know, we're as beholden to that two-sidesism as we were before, where we need to be afraid to approach the obvious disparity, the obvious inequity. I think people have the language now. So when we're having these conversations, we don't have to be scared about getting fired for talking about Black despair and Black death and systemic inequality and structural inequality, right? The system kind of understands the language of it. You know, but I think, and I know we'll get to this piece later, but we do need to make sure that we are taking time to breathe. And that's why I actually love this, because I know all you brothers. Eugene is the only brother I know from afar because I see him on TV. Everyone else I kind of know, so I respect the work, and I respect the effort that it takes to get up every single day and face these issues. You know, so it's rough out there. But again, you know, Ida B. Wells didn't have an opportunity to say, you know what, I'm done, right? So we have to remind ourselves of who we are in the work that we're doing. And I see Jamil, brother, here. This is the beard god. Now I don't see your beard. This is the beard god there.
Yeah, well, you know, when you don't have a barber in the you know.
Yeah, how you able to get a haircut, man?
Life, brother, you gotta do what you gotta do.
I literally wrote down, ask about haircuts, and I was like, we'll see if it's appropriate somewhere.
We'll get to
it. We gotta, the thing about it is, I joke, but we gotta laugh, and we gotta find camaraderie in this, because we are in this together. And I think that's the other thing, and I don't want to be too long-winded. But the way we see journalism, and there's so much competition, especially from the TV side, right? It's like image matters and all this, the politics matter. But you know what? We are together, and there's solidarity in the truth, in shining light in dark places, right? So we in this together. So thank you again, Jarrett, for pulling this together.
Of course, of course. I have to say, one of my friends, colleagues, mentors at NABJ, Ryan Williams, texted me and was like, I think we need to do something like this. And I thought it was a spot on idea to be able to have this kind of a conversation. And while we're talking about how difficult it can be to cover some of these stories, I think it'd be really great Eugene, you touched on this a bit at the beginning, talking about how hard it is to cover some of these stories. And I know that I've had instances where I was like, I really just don't want to have an opinion about that today. Or I really don't want to have to come in and explain to you why this matters. Have there been moments for you guys where you did say no, or you did approach it in a way that was just easier or safer for you to cover the story? And either one of you can jump in. Or don't.
Oh, I thought that was to Eugene, but you know what? I think that the one thing is, it is hard in these newsrooms where you are always concerned about the white gaze, right? So people asking you for opinions that you may or may not have an answer to. But I'm always afraid, like, if we say no, who else will cover it?
Right.
Will it affect the coverage? Because I trust myself, I trust everyone on this panel to make sure the story is told with precision, but also with care, and it's done the right way. And so that's the one thing we do need to take time and feel that we have enough agency to say, like, you know what, I need to step back because this is too much. But then the fear is, you know, if I don't step up and I'll make sure the story is told right, will it get told at all, or at least the right way?
I've had that experience where I went in early in the morning. Like I was in the afternoon shift, but I went in for the morning show because there wasn't anybody in the room that I trusted to be able to cover one of these stories. Eugene, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I think early in my career, I was a little more anxious about writing about race because I was afraid of being typecast as like the Black reporter. And that I wasn't going to be allowed to write about other things. But I remember being really upset one time in Phoenix as we were headed into MLK, the MLK holiday. And like the Friday before, it appeared that nothing had been written about MLK coming up. And I realized pretty quickly that if I did not write it, as Trymaine said, that it wouldn't get written if I didn't speak out about things. And I had to make the decision that it was more important to me, as a Black person, as a human being, but also as a journalist. I mean, journalist is not my only identity, nor is it my primary identity, that it was important for these issues to be addressed. And I think a lot of times we know that means that we have to step up. And there could be consequences for that sometimes, depending on what newsroom you're in and its leadership and how they view its people, their people of color. But I don't think at this, where I am now and at this place in my career, I can think of an example where I wanted to step away from writing something that really needed to be written because I just knew that it just needed to be written.
And I think it's also part, excuse me, Eugene, I think it's also part of educating your newsroom, educating your colleagues. Two things that I've done over the last 5 years that I've been very proud of is start the AJC's Black Facebook page. And it's just called AJC Sepia, where we aggregate all of the articles that we've written that will appeal to a Black audience. And we put them on the Facebook page. We get national stories. We get all you guys' stories and post them on there. All the stories that come from the paper that would be of appeal to a Black audience, we put on that page. And it's done it's like one of our best, it's one of our largest independent, or not independent, but one of our largest Facebook pages other than the main AJC Facebook page. And it's called AJC Sepia. And another thing I've done over the last 5 years, this is our 5th year doing it, is have a Black History Month series based off of the AJC Sepia page. So I started the AJC Sepia page about 6 years ago. About 5 years ago, I started the Black History Month series, which was a daily, every day in February, we write a story about Black history. And it's not about Martin Luther King or whatever, it's about just something different we've written about double consciousness and W.E.B. Du Bois and the Talented Tenth, just bringing about things that people don't necessarily think about for Black history or think about and you would see in a newspaper. And they've done very well. And I think that it's important that we all, use our innovation and try to, bring things, because, honestly, without me, we wouldn't have AJC Sepia and we wouldn't have this award-winning Black History Month series that we've done every year. So I think it's always important to bring things to the table, not be fearful. Because like Eugene said, I used to be fearful as well of being typecast as a Black reporter. But then I was just like, if I'm not doing it, nobody's gonna do it.
Yeah, I'll mention two things. It's very minor. Coming off of what Ernie said, something a lot less impactful, but it is something that I think that every person can do in this business. I created two things on my Twitter feed, two lists. One is for Black media, and one is for women of color who write. And every single time that one of my editors asks me for a recommendation for a Black writer, I not only point them to somebody who I think would be good for a piece, but I also make sure that they are subscribed or looking on those lists. I make sure that they are expanding their own media diet. I make sure that they are aware of other Black journalists in the media sphere. So we don't fix this problem unless we help expand their knowledge. That's the way I look at it. It's not that I'm annoyed by the question per se. It's not, I certainly am happy to, recommend writers who I think would be good for a particular piece. But I need them to also have names on the tips of their own tongues. But also, just one thing that comes to mind when we think of this question, early in my career, I started my career as a broadcast producer. Trymaine and I were colleagues at MSNBC when I was working on shows there. And I stopped a very well-known broadcast host before that from talking, he's white, from talking about Bill Cosby's pound cake speech in agreeing with it. And, in a way that he thought was, beneficent, but I told him, I said, look, this is how this is going to come off, in a Black audience, and it's just something that he didn't understand. He needed to have it explained to him, and he stopped dead in his tracks. He listened to me. Not every host or personality is going to, but I'm thankful, and I think he and I still talk about it. He's thankful that he did.
Sorry. I had a conversation recently with a fellow journalist about what we decide to consume in terms of media, and what is okay to see and what's not. And there's a lot of discussion around whether or not we should be sharing the videos of Black men being killed in the streets by police or by just everyday white people. I want to know where you guys stand on what you decide to consume and what you decide not to, and how you arrived at that decision. And Ernie, I'll let you start.
I think it's kind of a case-by-case basis, depending on how I feel. Like, I've not fully watched the Arbery video. I know that's out there, but I've not fully watched it because I just can't process it right now. So it just depends on, just how I'm feeling. I don't have any problem with people seeing it, because seeing what they consider to be an injustice, to see an unarmed Black man being shot by two white men and filmed by a third white man. I don't have any problem with people seeing that, but it just in my own spirit right now, I just haven't had the heart to watch it right now.
Eugene?
Yeah, not only have I not seen this entire video, I haven't seen the full video for a lot of the unarmed Black men and women who have been killed, be it by law enforcement or other individuals. And I don't have a strong stance about these videos not being shared. I mean, I think it's hard to argue that we would be as far as we are in this situation if that video had not been shared. Perhaps there has to be a way to give people some type of a warning. I'm not quite sure the best way to do it. But for me personally, I don't want to see the entire video. I don't need to see the entire video. But I do know that there might be some people who do. And I also understand that there's real concern that some people are entertained by this, or perhaps are approaching it with a lack of sensitivity that we believe that Ahmaud and his family deserve. And so for me, it's not a easy question to answer in terms of what we should do as a society. But I know for me personally, it's really difficult.
Trymaine, go ahead.
Yeah, you know what? I decided a while ago that I wouldn't be sharing these videos anymore. And it's not just across the board, across the board, maybe there's a case-by-case thing, but I decided a while ago that I think the risk of re-traumatizing Black people it's like slicing that wound open, and here I am just spreading some salt around, because we understand the injustice. We understand the pain. We've been on the victim side of this pain for a very long time. I do believe that it should be in the sphere, because white people need to see this, because white people oftentimes do not believe the stories of inequity and violence that we get from the state and neighbors and otherwise. But I think it's almost like those old lynching photos. There's a book called Lest We Forget, and it's a huge book full of all the lynching photos. And you see the white children and families smiling up as this kind of grotesque image of a body hanging, swinging from a tree. How much more do we need to see to understand the pain, right? But I still think that a lot of people have been shielded and buffered from the realities for so long that they can't comprehend that it's still going on and that there's this kind of through line. But personally, I feel like why I don't need to share that anymore, right? And I think we need to handle it with care and responsibility. And sometimes our media outlets do, and sometimes they don't. But we have this question, like, what do these videos do? What purpose do they serve? But it's so, we also just don't see other people being gunned down, right? Obviously, it's a matter of how often it happens, but we just don't see that kind of white violence, white hurt, white pain. So sometimes you do have to question whether it's like when we cover Native American communities, is it this poverty porn, right? Is this violence porn? Is this Black death porn? I don't know if we figured it out. I certainly haven't figured it out, but it's such a powerful force. I mean, we need to have these conversations more.
I mean, I'll just say this. I mean, I wrote a column 5 years ago about how these videos are numbing America to the spectacle of Black pain. And we know throughout our healthcare system about how Black pain is viewed as lesser than white pain, and how that has real health consequences. Literal health consequences. And so I think that we need to really take all of that into account when we share these videos, or choose whether or not we're going to be doing that. I personally choose not to do that anymore at all for any reason whatsoever. I'll tell you why. Because if white people need to see them, they are available, and white people can go find them. And if white people really need to see them at this point, after all this time, to understand that white supremacy needs to be eradicated, then, I mean, what else do you need to understand? I mean, like, what else, how many more people need to die for you to understand that this needs to be taken out of our society, that this cancer needs to be cut out? How many more people need to die? And how many more things like this do you need to see? So that's why I don't share them, because I don't need to parade the spectacle of our violence against our people to prove to anybody that they need to join the fight. Either they're going to join it or not. Now, granted, I think that the point of it becoming public certainly pushed forward the legal accountability in this case, and it helped expose the cover up. But it's the shaming factor is important. But I don't need to do it. I don't need to take part in that.
And I guess Jamil, to that point, I guess you do need some degree of a spark, right? You need anger, right? And
yeah,
without seeing that, you have to rely on the documents and fuzzy accounts of what happened. But I guess, and I'm with you. I don't share it, and I think you're exactly right. But then I was like, on the other hand, I guess you do need to stir some outrage. Right? I hate that word outrage.
I think Reverend Al in your podcast made the key point. It's like the prosecutors had this. They had the video. The whole time. And so it's not the fact that this video all of a sudden was submitted somebody dropped it off. They've had this. They knew how awful this was. It's the fact that now America knows. So, there is some value to it, I guess. But I think as a journalist, I mean, I had to watch it several times to write that piece that I wrote. Several times. And
how did you feel watching it?
I mean, I've had, as a broadcast producer for Matt Al and for Melissa, I had to break down all kinds of videos. I had to break down the Trayvon video, Eric Garner video, the Walter Scott video, frame by frame, several times.
Yeah.
It didn't numb me to it, but I handle it with a certain professional remove until I have to take a moment and sit in the corner and cry.
I know that the moment that was a turning point for me, because before the moment I'd been watching all of the videos, the Philando Castile video was the one that did it for me. Seeing him lying there dying, seeing Diamond praying, screaming to God, begging for his life, but then seeing their 4-year-old child,
the baby,
holding the mom's hand and saying, I'll never get her voice out of my head, hearing her say, "It's all right, mommy, I'm right here with you." Like, I completely broke down, and like I just wept after watching that video. And I thought to myself, like, I never need to do that again. And I don't know that I will never do it again, but it was the first time that I really thought about how I needed to be thoughtful about the way that I consumed those videos and those images and all of that content that, you know, circulates on the internet. And so one of the things that I am really curious about, and I feel like there's stigma in amongst Black men about how we take care of ourselves, and what kind of ways that we go and either seek therapy or whatever those things are, whatever our vices are. I'd love to know how you all are taking care of yourselves in moments like these, especially when we're having so many of these conversations. Eugene, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I mean, so I have a therapist that I talk to weekly. And one of the main things that we discuss, it's what it's like being a Black person, being a queer person, covering race and identity and other issues in the Trump political era, and what it's like to, you know, write something and work yourself up to go on TV to talk about it, and to like get emails and DMs calling you everything except for Eugene. You know, I have found it to be incredibly helpful. And I recommend it. It's not something that I ever, you know, considered before I started therapy. I actually started going for something else, like some relationship breakup stuff. And my therapist was like, let's talk about some of these other things you're talking about that I've heard you mention. And I think, thankfully, my therapist recognized that I had actually become numb to some of the challenges that, you know, one experiences being a Black man, writing about the death of Black men. I realized that it was way more difficult for me than I think I realized, and that I initially was not in a newsroom, not where I currently am, but I had previously been in a newsroom where I was not really working closely with people who I think really understood the challenges and how that affected a lot of different things. And I needed more support. And so had I not had that type of counsel and, you know, advising about what I need to do to make sure I'm in a healthier environment, and have healthier relationships, and know when to back away, and know when I actually can step up to situations, I perhaps would have continued to make poor decisions that would have affected me professionally. And I'm really grateful that I've made, you know, therapy a priority for me professionally.
Anybody else?
Well,
Go ahead, Ernie.
yeah, I don't see a therapist, but I think perhaps I probably should at some point. And I think probably one of the reasons why I don't is that old African-American trope of not wanting to feel weak, not wanting to feel that, you know, you need some kind of mental help. But I think at some point that's something I need to look into. But I think I have, you know, and I often think it's good and it's bad, that I have a way of kind of disassociating myself with stories that I've written. Like, I could write a story 2 weeks ago and have no recollection of it if someone brings it up or someone calls me about it. And I'm able to kind of compartmentalize my work life from my home life. So usually when I get off work, when I'm done with the story, I go home, I watch the Yankees. I'm not watching them now because of all this, but, you know, I try to get home and watch, you know, television or just relax, sit out on the patio, and it's kind of gone from me. Until the next day, then I kind of restart the next day. But I think at some point, but I don't know if that's healthy. You know, Eugene talks about that. I'm not sure if my disassociating myself so completely from my work when I get off at 5 o'clock is the healthiest thing. So that's kind of one of the things I'm kind of going through myself. Like I mentioned with Trymaine, 5 or 6 years ago, we were covering, all these cases. I'm out on the road every week, covering a different case, and it does really, really, weigh on you mentally. And I just never sought any kind of help for that. And, hopefully I'm not going to have any kind of really, really bad situation a couple of years from now, in terms of not getting it addressed. So it's something I think I need to start looking into if I'm being honest.
Trymaine, how are you taking care of yourself?
I've tried to, a couple things is just be really mindful. And I know it's one of those buzzwords now, but mindfulness is really important. I think sometimes we think we're processing what we're going through, but we're just putting it in a box and sitting it over here. You're putting it over here. I really try to be mindful and take time to breathe and really process what I'm feeling and what I'm going through. I've never seen a therapist, even though like Ernie, at some point I probably should. But for me, what has helped is really to live in the moment, right? I'm at the Honeycomb Hideout right now. Listen, I said, I'm in the woods. So whenever I get an opportunity to roll, I'm out. I have a little daughter. I'm like in the moment. I'm seriously not playing. My priority is my health, my family, and of course, our job as journalists. I feel so connected. It's part of my identity, how I see myself as a griot of sorts and telling these stories. But if we're not around, if we're not healthy enough to continue to carry that sword, then we're no good. And so for me, it's really being intentional about, listen, it's family time. My priority is my family. I try to work out. I try to run. I stay healthy. A few years ago, I had a near-death experience. I had a heart attack. And there is zero chance to me that everything I've been through from life and experiences as Black people and Black man in America and the stuff that I covered did not play a role, because I was pushing. And whether it's a casual conversation, whatever, we talking about the same stuff. We talking about the system. We talking about trying to find a way to buoy Black people and tell our stories in the right light. And so for me, it's like, you know what? You gotta step back. And you can't think just because I'm not taking my stress out on my friends and family that it's not affecting you, right? Because I'm the type of person where we're gonna chop it up and we're gonna laugh and we're gonna have a good time no matter what, right? But I have to take account of what I'm consuming, the messages that I'm just trying to decipher. And because Black death is real. We don't live and die the same in America, and we're cognizant of that more than anyone, right? There are those who experience it, and here we are on the front line actually documenting it, watching the video over and over again, spending hours structuring a lead, right? Going on TV, putting on a strong face and looking at that camera and saying, and it's hard, but for me, it's just like, be conscious of it, be mindful, chop that thing up and disperse the parts that you don't need, take the part that is the fuel of it, and saying, we have to tell this story for X, Y, and Z reason. But this part, that video, I don't need to consume that, right? And then the other part is really living. We have one life to live. And so we're here for a brief time, might be going tomorrow, might be going the day after that. So living your life. You're not just a journalist, right? And so for me, that has been my therapy, even though I probably should, sit down and rap with somebody at some point about some things, but it's really helped. I think intent is the right word, intentional, that my priorities are straight.
Jamil, how are you taking care of yourself?
And where do I start? Weekly therapy, number one. So I mean, it's a lot going. There's a lot going on in my life, personally and professionally. So got everything that we all been talking about. Plus, going through divorce. So it's like all of that at the same time. Somebody be like, "Wow, that's too much to go, to handle." But when you have therapy and you have people in your life who really help keep you on the right path, I think it's been really, really helpful. I think, to be perfectly honest, man, Trymaine, what happened to you, man, scared me. And I'll be, I really took a good assessment of my own health when that happened. And I started to lose weight, and I'm down about, maybe 25, 30 pounds in the last 2 years. And right now, what's helping sustain me, and especially in this time, this very strange, isolating time, meditation, yoga, and continuous exercise, making that a part of your life and prioritizing that in your work day. So if there is a time where it's like, okay, I'm really crashing on this draft, I don't have time to work out, and you're thinking you don't have time, I don't have time to eat. You always have time to eat. You got time for 5 minutes to stretch out on the mat. You got time to take care of yourself. You have to make time because it also affects the work. Plain and simple. If you want the work to be good, you gotta take care of yourself.
That part, Jamil. I think Jamil said something that's so important is the idea that we just don't have time, right? You mean to tell me if I'm at 30 Rock and I'm handling my business and I go to the gym for hours, somebody has anything to say, right? You getting your job done, I'm trying to stay alive. You're gonna tell me I can't take a little time to, if you need to go somewhere and go meditate and take a breath, any other human being in the newsroom otherwise has anything to say about that, especially as long as you're putting in your time. And I think one thing that is important, and Eugene, you mentioned this earlier, when you come into the business and you're a young journalist, there's a different kind of pressure and you engage differently with the dynamics in the newsroom. And fortunately, we've had the privilege, many of us on this panel right now, we've been around for a while now. We have the respect of our peers and our bosses and supervisors, and we've shown time and again that we're willing to put in that work. So it's a little easier. But even when you were younger, I think the one thing that makes you, no pun intended, bulletproof in the situation is when you really do your thing, now you can create a little buffer between you and any forces trying to stop you from doing what you're trying to do. And I think we need to make sure, especially with these young journalists and journalists that have been around the block for a while, is take time for yourself. This is life. This is life. It's not just, at the end of the day, I think about this all the time with my daughter who will be 8 in August. At the end of the day, and she's 30, 40 years old, she's not gonna be like, Dad, you killed that story back in 2020. Oh, that lead, that podcast was, oh my, she's gonna say, Daddy, remember that time? Remember we did this? Remember we spent time doing this? And so the most important thing is that we're around for the people we love and around for ourselves. Let's love ourselves enough. That's self-love and that negative self-talk that can get inside of our heads, especially with journalists, because of our craft and everyone around us. But make sure our self-talk is healthy. Make sure we're moving and trying to eat and live in a healthy way. We have to, but also helping these young journalists coming into the business, make sure that they're centered and aligned right for themselves and for all of us.
I was just about to mention that. I mean, let's be here for ourselves, but let's also be here for these younger folks who are coming up through the business. Some of them are having hard times personally. Some of them not having, good, life and work balances. Some of them having bad life experiences. Let's make sure we're there for them and understand that we're there for them in a healthy way, and not, it's not about career. It's about life. Hey, we're here for you as friends. We're here for you in a really positive way. Look to us because we've been through it. We understand.
I feel like this is a great place to bring in this question that comes from Ryan Williams. It says, as Black men in the newsroom, we are often a minority within a minority, which more often makes it difficult for our colleagues to understand us when stories like these, Ahmaud Arbery, hit the wires. Have you found a sympathetic ear within the newsroom, and what can news managers do to better handle stress Black men feel when realities of racism becomes viral? I can say that for myself. I have not had that in a newsroom. I've only had that as a freelancer, where I'm writing with Black outlets or writing about identity or about being queer or about being, whatever. Only as a freelancer have I really felt like I've heard it, had a sympathetic ear from my editor or the person that I was reporting to. What experience have you all had with that? Eugene, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, the Post is a great place to work, to be a Black person writing about identity. There are other Black people in the newsroom who are incredibly sympathetic, and people who are not Black who are, and for that I'm grateful. But I started at BET News 20 years ago, and what's been most beneficial for me, which I imagine has been the case for most people on this panel, it's just the network of Black journalists that I've built up over the years. And so the Black journalists who I text or DM or call or spend actual time with aren't actually in my newsroom. And it's not a slight, at the Post. It's just, it's actually a privilege of having been able to do this as long as we have, and to have spent time connecting with other people who do understand. And so, this seems like a easy plug or like it was planned, but for anyone engaging this, especially young journalists, like the value of NABJ and organizations like this on a chapter and national level, for me, cannot be overstated, especially for situations like this.
Did anyone else want to comment in there? Because we have a lot of questions I want to get through, but if anyone else has kind of found a sympathetic ear or has an idea of how news managers can better handle that, I'll let.
I think the key is, to find, the best is, when news managers, find that, you are, enduring some kind of stress that's related to these kinds of moments, and gives you space. And I found that's certainly at Rolling Stone, certainly at, previous stops, where, hey, this is a lot for you, take a break,
And just real quick, what Jamil said earlier, as I've gotten older in the newsroom, and I guess we're all kind of old men now, it's also important for us to kind of serve as
hold on.
I guess it's kind of important for us to kind of serve as that role model as well. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution has always had a very, very good history of hiring African-Americans, hiring very, very smart young people, having very smart African-American leadership. And now I see my role as kind of a newsroom leader to kind of help guide some of these younger reporters and some of these younger, really, really smart, bright kids that we're hiring, to kind of guide them, encourage them, and make sure that they know that everything's going to be okay, and that they have someone that they can talk to about things that they can't talk to perhaps their manager about, or if they're having a bad day, they can talk to me. I want to be the kind of that person in the newsroom.
That's the one reason we always need to also push on newsroom diversity. It's not that every Black person in the newsroom is going to have an ear for you, but I found, there's a woman named Yvette Miley at MSNBC. And again, leadership is great. I actually love MSNBC. They actually support the work that I've done and care about these issues. But Yvette is the type of person where, and again, we're not in a newsroom, the Ahmaud Arbery situation happens, I can be in there talking to her. There have been situations where we're talking about whatever it is, and my eyes are welling up because I'm getting really excited about whatever it is, and I know she understands. And sometimes you have sympathetic colleagues who are great journalists, great people, but they just don't always fully understand the depth of whatever you're grappling with. And so when we look around a newsroom sometimes, and there's no one that looks like you, and again, sometimes everyone that looks like you, all skin folk ain't kinfolk necessarily, so that doesn't necessarily mean anything at all. But we know, especially through NABJ, that we all have each other's back a lot. So anyway, newsroom diversity is important. So that when you turn look the other way, maybe there's someone there that might be sympathetic.
Okay, so I wanted to get to this question that comes from Kenneth on Facebook. It says, should we as Black journalists tell our audiences to follow up with holding local authorities accountable when and if we share these videos? Should we strictly focus on where accountability needs to be placed? Anybody want to jump in on that one?
Well, I mean, certainly as an opinion journalist, I think maybe I have a little bit more leeway to do something like that. I think that, I can certainly, advocate for a little bit more action in that regard. I think that, I think that a news consumer should, understand at this point that, when you consume something like that, and you get outraged, that you can't just go home and sit on it. That somebody, congressman should be called, a letter should be written, even if a tweet is sent or donation is sent, then that's something. I think that I think it's incumbent upon people who consume media not to simply wait for instructions.
I also think that's where process stories are really important. So me as a journalist, I'm not going to go up on TV and say you should do A, B, C, or D. I'm not even going to write those things. But I think I can remember, and I don't remember which shooting it was, but I remember there was this press conference and there was this young sister who was, she was tuned up and angry about the situation, rightly so. But she was foisting all her anger and energy at the governor, when really it's the prosecutors, right? We need to understand just the mechanisms of power, the mechanisms of justice, and journalists, because we operate in these spaces in the minutiae, and we want to tell these stories, these narratives. It's also important to make sure that we are just painting the full context clearly and transparently with the levers of power, so people know who they need to voice their energy at, but let them take away, whatever they must from it.
Okay, I want to get to the next question. It says, what do you say to Black journalists who want to do stories surrounding Black oppression while in school, but feel the pressure of racial animus in college newsrooms? I would guess most of us have probably been in some kind of a collegiate newsroom or covered when we were much younger. Jamil, I saw you nodding. You want to take that one?
Yeah, they do them anyway.
Yeah.
These people you will know for 4 years, probably, if that. Do them anyway. because those are the clips that you will need and probably to, try to get a job. If that's the kind of career you want to build, then do them anyway. Now, it also depends upon what kind of animus you're facing. And I don't want to just blow that off. But, talking about, collegiate paper, if you want to do stories that tell the kinds of truths and report on the kinds of stories that you really want to talk about, go after it, and don't let anybody stop you.
And be good. Focus on the craft. Focus on craft. I think when you focus on being really good and airtight, that's the focus, right? And not worrying about them, because again, like Jamil said, I always, whether it was college newsroom or even early career or even now, is you want to develop the kind of catalog where I can slide this over to you across the table and say, this is what I've been up to. Just check it out. This is what I've been up to. And that's where you get your power from. That's where you get your leverage from. So worrying about people in newsroom who don't, college newsroom who don't quite understand, focus on craft every single day. Focus on story, right? Get the name of the dog. Get your details right. Get your facts right. And keep working on that. And then, you'll be free and clear out of there. But focus on the stories that you want to do, because you need to have that passion, but also craft.
Yes.
I have a question from Troy that says, we will likely be working in this pre-vaccine COVID-19 environment for a significant amount of time. What impact do you feel this era will have on career moves over the next year or 2 years? That's an interesting question. If I just take that first, I will say, I feel like it's largely unknown, right? I think we're all kind of seeing how things are beginning to dwindle. I was up for a job at a company and was expecting an offer in a few days. And quarantine happened and slowed everything down. And that offer was a few days away. And then it was we'll get back with you into a couple of weeks. And it's been almost 2 months. And so I think that from my perspective is largely unknown as we continue to see COVID continue to grow and grow. And I think the coming waves of things that we still are not sure what those are going to look like, I think that make it even more uncertain, which is probably not the answer you were looking for, but that's how I'm seeing it. Anybody else?
No, I agree with you 100%. I know a person who applied for 3 jobs and was on target to get, one of each of these 3 jobs, and they've all kind of cut them off, So I think we're in an uncertain period right now, not only in media, but every profession. So, we don't know what's going to happen with the second wave. We don't know what's going to happen with the vaccine. We're all working. We don't even know what's going to happen in our own shops for a lot of us. So, right. I think right now we're kind of in that holding pattern, all of us, to see what's just going to happen.
I think it's hard. It's hard now, especially since you can't have face-to-face interaction, engagement with people. Yeah. But I think relationship building is probably more important now than ever. Before, it was always important. You had your craft on one hand, and on the other hand, it's how are you building relationships to get people to invest in you and want to see you win and want to see you succeed? I think now I'd be Zoom meeting, I'd be emailing, I'd be make sure that you have some anchors down. And again, people have a lot to worry about right now, right? They're not just worried about hiring someone, they're worried about their kid's school, right? But I would double down on that, because the point is so much is uncertain, but you want to give yourself a chance. Yeah. Build those relationships somehow.
Okay. I promised you guys I would take an hour of your time, and we're coming up on that hour. So I want to respect that. We have a question from Albert Payano that I thought was a good way to maybe wrap this. He says, how do you make sure to add just enough hope in your reporting? And I think that we started off talking about how difficult these stories can be to cover and how frustrating it can be to cover them. And I thought this was an interesting question. And Jamil, I'll let you start. How do you make sure to add just enough hope in your reporting, especially when you're an opinion journalist, right? And a lot of times, things are really frustrating to cover. So I'll let you take that first.
A lot of times I don't write about those hopeful things. And so I find that what I try to do, I find hope in action. I find hope in progress. And so if I can find a way to point towards something that is, either going to result in action, result in progress, or something that I feel like is going to be productive, that is hopeful for me. If I'm not here to fill the reader up with a bunch of happy talk. That's just not really, I don't think that that's productive, nor I think it does it serve the reader. I think that if, at the end of the day, that's not really, that's Trymaine was saying, that's not really good craft for a columnist. Columnist is not there to make a reader feel better. Columnist is there to make an argument. So if I made an argument effectively that's made you feel differently or made you think differently about a particular issue, then I've done my job. So I hope that you are thinking differently. That's what I hope.
And I'm kind of on the opposite end of Jamil as being a straight news writer, a straight news reporter. So I can't also try to consciously put hope in a story either. My job is to try to get the facts, just try to make every story that I can as factual as possible, as honest as possible, and let you make your own decisions as to how you're going to digest that information. If I come up with a story, a 20-inch story on the front page that has all the facts in it, all the good facts, all the bad facts, all the hopes, what you consider hopes and dreams or whatever, as well as what the problems are, I think I've done my job. So, I hate to say that I'm not in the position to offer hope in my reporting, but I can offer as thorough a job as I possibly can to let you kind of pick out what you want in that story to get you through whatever that topic is.
Yeah, I'll say, I'm sorry, Eugene, you go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was just going to briefly say, providing hope is not the goal or objective of what I write, but what I have found at times that has given me hope about, very difficult topics we're writing about, be it Ahmaud Arbery or just any other issue related to race and, Trump's America, is diversifying your sources, speaking to professors and activists who've been invested in this work for a long time, who will not, sugarcoat how difficult and how ugly some of these stories are, but somehow get up every single day to keep doing the work and have found some drive and motivation to keep them focused and inspired. They'll usually have a quote or usually point to something that moves them that, quite frankly, makes me feel like not all is lost, and I hope I can pass that on to the reader.
I want to kind of second that idea. And I've evolved over the years from, straight print to digital to broadcast to also now I'm doing podcasting. And for me, I've always found hope. And this is just me as a journalist and me as a person who grapples with these ideas, that people continue to fight, right? Fight oppression. They continue to struggle. I find hope in struggle. I find hope in fighting the machine. I find hope that as journalists, we are supposed to be the eyes and ears for the besieged, right? The most vulnerable among us. And so just recently did a podcast on kind of how COVID was affecting Black folks. And we took it historically, went down the cancer alley, right? And so there's a whole structural issues there. But at the end, this one woman and a squad of like 10 or 12 people are fighting big industry. The idea that there is hope, and she's in Louisiana where 100 plus years ago, 500 enslaved African peoples took arms against their enslavers, right? So there's this through line of pushing and struggle and fighting. And no matter what the weight is, no matter what the oppressor is doing, that people are still fighting. And so it's not me necessarily always explicitly saying, this is for a little bit of hope for you, but it's zeroing in that this too, that people have agency. People have fight and struggle in them, and they always have. And so for me, I always zoom in on those narratives.
Before we go, Eugene, you kind of touched on the last thing I wanted to ask you all. What are you finding encouraging right now? What are you either watching or hearing or reading that is encouraging you? I will tell you, to be honest, I was a little bit reluctant to ask the question about what we're not consuming because the person I was discussing with, we were polarized on that topic, and I was encouraged by all of you all saying that you all really monitor what you watch, the videos that are coming in, and I felt a little seen. I was very happy to hear that from everybody. So last question here is, what are you watching, reading, hearing? What's encouraging you right now? Trymaine, I'll let you go first.
Honestly, and this is from this vantage point as journalists, it's seeing all of you, right? Each one of you, I stumble across. Eugene's on MSNBC. I see Ernie's work from Atlanta. Jamil, of course. You, young brother, stepping up, doing your thing. I see it time and again. It's encouraging that that so many of us, and again, or it's Aaron Haynes, or it's Nicole Anna Jones, everywhere I turn, there are Black journalists doing amazing things, and not just doing soft features, right? like, you know, holding truth to power in so many ways. And that is encouraging. Beyond that, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot to be discouraged about. But I love that as, you know, members of NABJ, especially coming together and really pushing and doing it at such a high level. And that's the thing. If you were to look across the newsrooms across America, some of their best and brightest are among us. And I find comfort and joy and camaraderie and a lot of pleasure in seeing us push.
Ernie, what's encouraging you right now?
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way. You know, as I mentioned, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution has always had a good number of African-American reporters, percentage-wise. And it's just good to pick up the paper every day and see us on the front lines, see us on the front pages, see us having you know, the main hit on the webpage of writing, as Trymaine said, important stories about this pandemic. And, you know, so I think that, you know, all of us are doing well, all of us are doing great work, and we're out there on the front lines, you know, doing what we need to be doing, just like, you know, like Trymaine said, kind of like walking in the footsteps of Ida B. Wells. And that's very, very encouraging to see. And this has been a great, like you said, Aaron Haynes and Nicole Hannah-Jones, just seeing what they're doing. I'm catching up on reading. I've been watching Love and Hip Hop for the first time. So,
is that encouraging you? Is that encouraging you, brother?
It's not encouraging me, but it's opening my eyes to a lot of things that's going on around the world.
Ernie, I have to tell you, I'm watching Love and Hip Hop. Not an answer I was expecting from you. I was gonna say.
Hey, I'm not watching it voluntarily. I'll say that.
Eugene, what's encouraging you right now?
You know, excuse my French, but I'm encouraged by the fact that a lot of people really do give a fuck about what's happening. You know, and I mean across demographics. I'm not exaggerating. Like I have been stopped in the club, at church, in the gym. People like, I read this, I saw this, here are my thoughts, this is how I feel. And it's really good to know that the work that we are doing every day, trying to shine light on issues that need to be exposed, is getting to people, and that people are motivated to act on that. And so I just find that engagement from people to be deeply encouraging.
Jamil, what's encouraging you?
I'm encouraged every day we're here, man. I mean, honestly, as hard as it is for us to survive, not just in this country, but in this business, and as hard as, you know, as many people as I see getting eaten up every day in this business, especially in this environment, I'm so encouraged every day to see all of us thriving and doing the work at with the kind of quality, consistent excellence that we're doing. And I'm just trying to keep up with y'all. I really am thankful to be in your company.
I'm really, really grateful to all of you for joining in here with us here and having this conversation and being open and honest with us. Before we go, Trymaine, tell people where they can find what you're doing and what you're working on.
So first and foremost, you can find the Into America podcast, again, where I examine how politics and policy impact the lives of everyday people. You can find that iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast, or tune in to MSNBC. You'll see me popping up here and there.
Ernie, tell people where they can find what you're doing.
Yeah, you can find me at the AJC.com. That's where I work, Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Also on Facebook, AJC Sepia. There's AJC space SEPIA. I'd appreciate if you like that page. And on Twitter and Instagram, I'm at Ernie Suggs. So hopefully I can get some new friends out of this.
All right. Eugene, where can we find your work?
I write for The Fix at the Washington Post. So if you go to twitter.com/thefix, all my work will be there with the rest of my team. My work specifically, though, can be found at Eugene_Scott.
And Jamil, where can people find the stuff that you're putting out into the world?
You can find me at Rolling Stone magazine. You can subscribe to Rolling Stone and get it in print. And you can also go to rollingstone.com/politics, where you can find work with me and my colleagues. And you can find me on social media at Twitter at Jamil Smith and on Instagram at Jamil K. Smith.
All right. Of course, I'm Jarrett Hill from NABJLA. I appreciate all of you for tuning in, whether you're on Zoom, on Facebook, or on NABJLA.org. You can find me everywhere at Jarrett Hill. I host a podcast. I write a good amount. And so you can find all my stuff at Jarrett Hill on Twitter. Thank you all so much for joining us. Have a great day. We'll see you later.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Peace.
Thanks, everybody.